Service and love, I mean, those are nice and all, but they don't have any real power to get things done in the real world. They don't actually work. So let me ask you, do you actually think what we call the real world is working? In the real world, might makes right. Those with power and money make the rules, and they make sure they are always in charge at the expense of the good of the whole. In the real world, the poor and the weak and the marginalized and the different are used, abused, and thrown away. See, look around. It's the real world that doesn't work. But what does work is the Jesus way. The way that has changed billions of lives for 2,000 years. Do you ever find yourself worried about the state of the world? Like maybe you feel like the country's headed in the wrong direction, or you're worried about politics or wars or the economy, or maybe even like the end of the world, these big picture things. Well, what do we do when we have these worries? We find solutions. And for most of human history, in a general sense, our solution has been to band together and create systems and institutions. We've created systems and institutions to give us a sense of security in an uncertain world. They're not necessarily all bad things. Some seem pretty essential, actually, like government, right? Whether it's a monarchy or a dictatorship or a democracy or a democratic republic. Maybe it's our economic systems, right? Socialism, communism, capitalism. Maybe even it's religious systems and institutions, or maybe probably like a combination of all of them. And if we get organized, we find the right system, we get the right people running them, then everything will be okay. But the problem is, we start seeing these institutions and these systems as our protection. We start putting our hopes into them, and they never live up to their promises. They never live up to what we intended them to do. They always fall apart. Why? Because our human systems always end up being ruined by humans. Hierarchies form and people gain power and don't want to let it go. Factions are created and they start pitting people against each other. And ultimately, those without power, who are different, who are weak, they lose. And here's where things get interesting. Jesus came along and introduced something completely different. He called it the kingdom of God reigning in the hearts and minds of his people. But this kingdom is counterintuitive. Everything in us tells us it shouldn't work. But somehow, it's been working for 2,000 years. And it's something we are all invited to. See, the only way to change the world is through Jesus' illogical kingdom. See, Jesus knew how flawed our human systems are. I mean, just look at the examples he had during his time and place. You had the Roman Empire, which was oppressive and ruthless and used its military might and violence to control and dominate. And then you had the religious establishment, the Sanhedrin and the temple, made up of teachers and priests who decided their law based on the Jewish scriptures. And with its complex rules and rituals, and they used these to control and condemn people. And as Jesus' ministry was ending, he made his way to Jerusalem, the center for both of these institutions, to declare himself the true king and to show the weakness of these systems and to offer something completely different. They were now on the way up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them. The disciples were filled with awe, and the people following behind were overwhelmed with fear. Taking the 12 disciples aside, Jesus once more began to describe everything that was about to happen to him. "Listen," he said, "we are going up to Jerusalem, where the Son of Man will be betrayed to the leading priests and the teachers of religious law. They will sentence him to die and hand him over to the Romans. They will mock him, spit on him, flog him with a whip, and kill him. But after 3 days, he will rise again." So we have this picture of Jesus relentlessly marching toward Jerusalem, where like nothing will stop him. It's time for the final showdown between him and these oppressive systems and institutions. And his followers are struggling to keep up, wondering what has gotten into their rabbi. So Jesus takes a quick break, and for the third time in the book of Mark, he explains the plan. It's actually the most detailed explanation he's given yet. And he says, yes, we are going to Jerusalem, and I will be betrayed by Judas. We don't know that yet in the story. And I will be judged by the religious leaders. And they will do what they do best. They will use their laws and their rules and their religious technicalities to try to control me. And they will sentence me to die. But under Roman law, they didn't have the power to actually execute anyone. So they will send me to the Romans. And they will do what their system has always done, what they do best. They will use their might and their strength and their violence to try to control and conquer me. And I will be tortured, and I will be executed. but it won't stick. 3 days later, I will rise again. Now we have to stop here because this is a very important point. See, Jesus' crucifixion wasn't just something that happened to him. It was something Jesus made happen. Jesus' death wasn't an accident. It was his planned inauguration. Now, it's not that Jesus challenged these power systems and institutions and lost. No, through his death and resurrection, he actually proved how weak those systems are. Now, even though Jesus is talking incredibly plainly, it's still too much for the disciples to wrap their minds around. But they do understand one thing. They do understand the idea that Jesus is going to Jerusalem to set up his kingdom, to declare himself the true king. So 2 of those disciples, James and his brother John, start thinking this might be a good time to solidify our positions in this new kingdom. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came over and spoke to him. "Teacher," they said, "we want you to do us a favor." "What is your request?" he asked. They replied, "When you sit on your glorious throne, we want to sit in places of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left." Now, before we judge these two too harshly, first, look at their faith. It's not like if we go to Jerusalem and we win. It's when you sit on your glorious throne. Like they really believed Jesus was going to take over. They really believed he was going to clean up their religion. He was going to kick out the Romans. He was actually going to start a new kingdom. Now, these 2, along with Peter, were part of Jesus's like inner circle. And so they're probably thinking when Jesus takes his throne, we need to make sure we edge out Peter and get the seats closest to Jesus, the seats with the most authority. In fact, in Matthew's account of this, there's a little added detail that they actually get their mom to ask Jesus for this favor. But the problem is, they expected that the kingdom of God would work like all the other systems and kingdoms throughout human history, where there would be hierarchies and power and dominance, and those with the titles would get to make the rules. And now it's their turn to be in charge. And even though this whole system thing has never worked for anyone else, it might just work for them. And we do the same thing. We think the solution is just a different version of all the other failed solutions. See, everything we try just puts certain people over other people. And so we feel like we need to argue and manipulate and debate and fight for power. And it doesn't matter who gets hurt and who slips through the cracks because the ends justify the means. We need to get our people in charge and get things to turn around. And Jesus sees that, he needs to give these guys a dose of reality. But Jesus said to them, "You don't know what you are asking. Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering I am about to drink? Are you able to be baptized with the baptism of suffering I must be baptized with?" "Oh, yes," they replied, "we are able." Then Jesus told them, "You will indeed drink from my bitter cup and be baptized with my baptism of suffering, but I have no right to say who will sit on my right or my left. God has prepared those places for the ones he has chosen." So Jesus says, you guys don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what you're asking. You want to be on my right and left when I bring in my kingdom? Guys, I've told you how that's going to happen. I'm going to die. Are you willing to make that sacrifice? And James and John, they totally sound like the teenagers they are, don't they? Like they're not really listening, but they're just a whole bag of confidence. And like, yeah, we got this, Jesus. Every kingdom takes work at the start, but yeah, we get it. You're talking metaphors about death. We'll die to ourselves. Like we'll sacrifice for a while and it'll be hard, but we've got this. And then once we win, then it'll be worth it because we'll be in charge. And what's kind of interesting is we do the same thing. Often we think, yeah, we might have to do some work. It might be tough, but we can handle it because it means we'll finally be on top and then we can change and fix things our way. And Jesus looks at us and he says, you want to actually find a solution? It's going to involve a lot more than you think. A new and better solution requires something new and more demanding. So Jesus says, don't worry, boys, you will drink from my cup of suffering. Like soon you will understand what I'm talking about. And as we see if you go read the story further in Acts 12, we see that James is actually killed by the king with a sword. And history tells us that John suffered terribly also for Jesus. And Jesus says, yes, you will suffer, but the spots next to me when my suffering happens, those spots are already taken. And as we read further in the story, we see that when Jesus was executed and brought in his kingdom, he was executed between 2 criminals, one on his left and one on his right. Now, while James and John are asking Jesus this favor, they weren't very subtle. And the other 10 disciples hear what's going on. When the 10 other disciples heard what James and John had asked, they were indignant. They were furious. Why? Why are the other disciples mad about James and John's request because they should have understood by now like what this kingdom was about, or maybe they should have learned their lesson from before when Jesus kind of gave them a lecture when they're arguing about who is the greatest. Nope. They're mad because they didn't think of it first. So again, Jesus tries to get the guys to understand just what his kingdom will be like. So Jesus called them together and said, "You know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them." It's like Jesus saying, look, I need you to get this. We don't have a lot of time. I need you to understand this. Every other kingdom, every other system, every other institution turns into the strong oppressing the weak, those with power ruling over those without power. And the disciples are probably thinking, yeah, we know Jesus. Like, we're living it right now. We see it every day with the Romans. We've experienced it with our religious leaders. And when you finally take over, then we will be in power and we can lord it over all those evildoers and use our power for good. And Jesus is like, no, just shut up. Just listen. But among you, it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else. Jesus flips our thinking of power and institutions and systems on its head. See, he says everyone else is fighting for influence. Everyone else is fighting for power and control. But you, my followers, you will be different. Authority and leadership in my kingdom will not be measured by how much you can force others to serve you. Instead of walking on others, you will lift others up. Instead of pushing your way to the front, you will serve at the rear. Instead of standing strong and conquering, you will kneel and serve. The kingdom of God is not about having power over others. It's about giving service to others. But how does Jesus know this will actually work? Because he went first. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom for many. The Son of Man, Jesus' favorite term for himself from Daniel 7, the one who will be given all authority, all power, whose kingdom will never end. The only person who actually deserved to have everyone serve him, the God of the universe, in a body, didn't come to be served, but to serve. Didn't use his power and his authority to conquer and force obedience, but to save all of humanity. Jesus put our lives over his. And Jesus came to bring a revolution, to show the flaws and the weaknesses of our human institutions and power structures. See, on the cross, Jesus reversed the meaning of power. He ransomed us from sin and death. See, the word ransom there is the word used to pay the price for a slave to go free, or to pay the ransom for a captive to come back home. And he conquered our greatest enemy, death, by serving, not by dominating. And his kingdom puts the least on top so they can be held up and served and loved and cared for. And in his kingdom, our natural and logical assumptions and views no longer apply. Jesus' service to the world transforms how we see the world. And if this is how the king inaugurated his kingdom, then his followers must follow his example. But you might say, okay, John, that's a sweet ideal, and in a perfect world, like that would work great and it'd be awesome. But this is the real world. If we don't fight for control, then they will. We will be taken advantage. We will lose any influence we have on society. Service and love, I mean, those are nice and all, but they don't have any real power to get things done in the real world. They don't actually work. So let me ask you, do you actually think what we call the real world is working? In the real world, might makes right. Those with power and money make the rules, and they make sure they are always in charge at the expense of the good of the whole. In the real world, the poor and the weak and the marginalized and the different are used, abused, and thrown away. We can never compromise and never actually find a solution together, because then the fight would be over and we wouldn't need those leaders and those factions. See, look around. It's the real world that doesn't work. But what does work is the Jesus way. The way that has changed billions of lives for 2,000 years, that has taken care of widows and orphans and the sick and the hungry, that has caused people to actually sacrifice everything for the good of their neighbor. And even if you don't believe in this God and Jesus thing, we can't deny that the Jesus way has shaped and changed the world for the better. The completely different of the kingdom of God is the only thing that can fix our real world. So let me ask you another question. What systems and institutions are you relying on? Maybe never put it in these words, but are you relying on government and politics? Like, the only way to save our nation is for my party or my candidate or my people to win. Or if only they would get it and agree with us, then everything would be good. Or relying on an economic system, like things would be better if people would just work harder and pull themselves up, like I did. Or if I could just get a little bit more, then everything would be okay. If we just got rid of the capitalists or the Marxists or the communists, things would be good. Or maybe it's religion. Like, if only this country were a Christian nation, things would be okay. We'd be saved. Or if I can make God happy by praying enough and going to church enough, and if I just follow the right rules, then I'll be okay. But has that actually worked? It's what we've been doing for all of human history. It just doesn't work. And in some cases, these institutions are necessary evils, but they won't actually fix anything. They're not something we can actually rely on and put our trust in. And Jesus invites every single one of us to something so much better, to join his different kingdom. He died to ransom you from the fear of the future, from the fear of what if, from the fear of maybe I'm not good enough, even from the fear of death. He has proven he is more powerful than all of them, and he has bought your freedom with his death and resurrection. He has broken the chains, and he offers us true freedom now and forever. So, if you are ready to live for the kingdom of God, first, accept Jesus' invitation to join his kingdom. Tell him. Say, thank you for loving me. Thank you for ransoming me. I pledge my allegiance to you and your kingdom. Make me new and make me yours. And then follow the way of the king. Reread what Jesus said just now in Mark 10:42 through 45. And as we let that sink in and see what Jesus really means, practice serving by serving 5 people this week, whether they know it or not. I mean, help a neighbor with their yard. Help take out their trash cans if you can. Help that single mom who needs her car washed or her brakes checked. Help young parents who need a break. Maybe give them a gift card to go out somewhere, something like that. Serve somebody 5 times this week. One way to serve, if you're part of our church, Crosscreek, or maybe you're part of a different church, is to serve at your church gathering. Like, that is a perfect practice to actually serve out in the community. Even showing up to a church gathering or a small group is serving, because you're creating a safe community for other people to discover the love of Jesus. See, we serve because our King served us first. So do you want to keep living in and for the real world? Living by the same old rules and under the same old systems that never actually deliver on their promise? Or are you ready to live in the kingdom of God now and forever? To live for and with the true King who lived, died, and rose again to serve you, and who ransomed you from sin and death. This kingdom is not just wishful or naive thinking. This is the kingdom that changed the world. See, the Roman Empire, it's just dust and ruins now, something we read about in a history book. The temple and its power center is now just a pile of rocks. The kingdom and the way of Jesus has outlasted all of them. It has changed billions of lives for 2,000 years. It is the only thing that works. I mean, imagine a society and a community where everyone was trying to outserve each other. I mean, think of a family or a relationship where everyone was trying to outserve each other. Imagine a church community serving their community at large because their King served them and died for them. That's the way of Jesus. In the kingdom of God, we serve because our King served us first. Thanks for watching and listening, especially if this is your first time. If you liked what you saw and heard, click like and subscribe so you don't miss another episode. We are a church in Salem, Oregon, and you can find out more about who we are and what we do at yourcrosscreek.com. And we love questions and conversations, so reach out to us at info@yourcrosscreek.com. And we are a nonprofit. We don't really exist without support from people just like you. So if you want to keep this good thing going, you can donate at yourcrosscreek.com/donate. And until we see you again, keep loving and stay classy, Salem.